All right, Analiese, and then I'll just be on the back end letting people in as you go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Analiese Hock. I'm a planner with Community Planning and Development, and here to just give a real quick update on a project expanding housing affordability. I was here a couple months ago, but just wanted to provide each of you with a little bit of an update on where things are at in the process, more so just as a preview and a heads up to when I'll come back in October with an actual policy recommendation that we really will be excited to get some feedback and have discussion on it. This is sort of just your refresh a little bit in some ways. So just in terms of a quick reminder of what we are kind of looking at through this effort, expanding housing affordability, is to look at kind of two main complementary tools. One is an existing tool that we have, and that is updating our city's linkage fee. And I'll talk just a little bit about a reminder of what that is. And then the second piece is kind of mandatory housing, or inclusionary housing is another term that we use, and associated incentives there. So just, a quick reminder of sort of, why are we doing this project? As many of you might recall, when I was here last time, we really talked a lot about housing needs and how those have substantially grown over the past 10 years, and especially during COVID. Our existing tools and kind of development trends are leading to gaps in housing affordability. And ultimately, as planners, it's our role to implement our adopted plans to create more equitable, affordable, and inclusive Denver. Additionally, too, you might be wondering, why are we talking about these tools? Just want to make it very clear that these are important complementary tools to the suite of programs and resources that our Department of Housing Stability has in place, but they're also really meaningful tools that can complement our existing work. Additionally, since I've been here last, there's been some exciting changes at the state legislature, most notably House Bill 1117, and I'll talk just a little bit about that bill. And then additionally, too, we know that the linkage fee in some ways is underperforming, and there's an opportunity granted to us in our ordinance to increase that fee now that we've conducted analysis to increase our funding for affordable housing. And so just a quick reminder of what House Bill 1117 does. I've sent Ian, or I can't remember if I hit send or not, but a PDF of this slide deck so you can distribute it. But in there is the direct link to the state's website. But just a few quick pieces that I think is helpful for folks to know, because it in many ways is kind of a bit of guardrails or limitations in terms of how we as the city can craft policies in alignment with this. But essentially, prior to this bill being passed, Denver and communities across the state were significantly restricted in their ability to require affordable housing on new rental development. And that's why we pursued tools like linkage fees, like incentives, and kind of voluntary affordable housing agreements. But with the passage of this bill, what it allows us to do is give local governments the ability to use our land use tools to promote the construction of new affordable housing units, and that can be through a voluntary or a mandatory approach. The second bullet here is pretty important, just to kind of understand a little bit of why we're pursuing it, and we'll be talking about alternative compliance in the future proposal. But essentially, the bill is very clear in the sense that it requires a choice of options or creates one or more alternative to the construction of new affordable housing units on site. And so we can certainly design a program to try to get as many constructed affordable units to be built on site, but we do need to provide at least one or more alternative. It also requires us to show our commitment to increase the overall number and density of housing units throughout the city, or create incentives to the construction of affordable housing. Denver already does a lot of this through our existing tools to really promote housing types and housing affordability, but this is also something that we'll be looking at through this effort. The last bullet there that it made quite clear, and they added language in this, but it essentially does not allow us to enact a rent control provision. They wanted to make that explicitly clear, that rent control as it was adopted in the early 1980s is still in effect. And so, that was a piece that some people were curious about, so I just wanted to clarify that piece of the bill. I do not work for the state or did not work on this bill, but it's important to note that those are kind of the legal limits in which we're operating under. So just, in terms of kind of a quick reminder of what these two tools are and kind of how they work. The linkage fee right now is an existing mandatory tool that applies to all new development, and it's assessed as a fee per square foot. That fee goes into our affordable housing fund, and on average, it provides us with anywhere from about $10 to $14 million a year. That fund is also funded by the marijuana sales tax, by your property taxes, and similar things. But all that goes into a pot that helps the city create affordable housing, preserve affordable housing, and support residents, in finding access to stable housing. The other second tool is kind of the new one. It's the new one on the table that was enabled by House Bill 1117, but it allows us to apply a mandatory housing requirement on newly constructed kind of multi-unit housing. And we can say, now a portion of your units needs to be affordable. The rest can be market rate, but a set aside portion needs to remain affordable kind of in perpetuity. And what that really does is that it creates more mixed income developments and therefore mixed income communities. Right now with the linkage fee, we're basically getting a lot of neighborhoods in new development that are either all market rate and therefore fairly expensive and unaffordable, or all affordable projects. And so mandatory inclusionary housing is a really key tool for the city to have more integrated housing types throughout the city. So in terms of kind of just that shift of policy and what it's going to look like, is that smaller developments that are new residential units, essentially 1 to 7 units, they currently pay a fee of 65 cents per square foot. What we are proposing is that they would pay an increased fee, but it would still be a portion or a fee per square foot option generally as their default. Any new residential of 8 units or more currently pays a fee of $1.61 per square foot. They do have that opportunity to do a build alternative plan, as we call it. What that yields is about 1% of units at 80% AMI. So it's really not much of a dent at all, and it's really not set up to incentivize that. Where the big shift and change is happening through this effort is that instead of paying a fee on the majority of new residential development in the city of Denver, instead you would be required to provide a particular percentage of units serving a particular area median income, a particular level of affordability. In addition to that, that's where incentives come into play in strategic locations to allow us to also leverage an even greater portion of affordability or go to deeper AMIs, for example, in exchange for some of those incentives. And that can look like permit fee reductions, more fast streamlined review, and height bonuses and things like that. And then lastly, things like non-residential office, retail, industrial, they will continue to pay a fee per square foot, but it'll be an increased fee from what they're paying today. So in terms of just kind of a quick update on the project timeline and where we are at, I came to you earlier this year in kind of Q1, Q2, and the focus of that was really identifying what our housing needs were, sharing best practices. Where we are at right now is the point of kind of wrapping up that financial feasibility analysis that was released in July of this year. And now we're really pivoting towards what are the recommended requirements and approach to these policy tools that take into consideration that financial feasibility, a lot of the important community feedback that we've heard, and balancing that with all of our city goals and priorities. The fall of this year is when we'll really start refining and confirming that policy alternative and really begin the drafting process. And then starting in 2022, moving that through the legislative review process with City Council and Planning Board. We'll be back to INC in October to talk about that policy proposal. And then I'm sure we'll certainly be back a handful more times throughout the process. But just wanted to give you kind of an update in terms of where we're at about halfway through the process, if you will. The other piece that I just wanted to give you guys a quick update on is some of the financial feasibility results. I'll pop a link to that in the chat here before I sign off. But financial feasibility is something that the city does when we are pursuing market-driven tools. And what that essentially means is that the vast majority of affordable housing that's developed in the city of Denver today is using public subsidy. So that is, in many times, looking at low-income housing tax credits, which are funded through the state, or leveraging ZAP financing at the local level, But it's really, how do we pull together all these public sources to pay for and create affordable housing? These tools are different in the sense that we're asking kind of profit-driven, market-based affordable housing developers to contribute to the city's affordable housing need. And so because it's a market-driven program, what that essentially means is that if we're not creating any new market rate units, then we're not creating any affordable units. And if we're not creating any new commercial or industrial type uses, then we aren't getting any funds for the linkage fee. And so what financial feasibility helps us really do is find that balance between addressing our city's housing needs, which are really significant, and also ensuring that, appropriate proportion of development can continue to occur. So these programs, actually, realize their program and outcome. The next three slides are just the very, very high level findings and summary of what was deemed to be financially feasible. And this is where we have a consultant that is an expert in this area of work, and they develop a series of prototypes to really help us understand what that means. But, in terms of, what is feasibility? What does it mean? I think it's important to note that we're not saying, is your project going to be as profitable as it is today? Because the answer is going to be no. We are now asking you to do more that is going to cost the developer something. However, in development, how it occurs is not necessarily just you make $1 million on this deal, but instead investors are looking for particular returns. And dependent upon their business type, they're going to either say, I'm more looking at a short-term return, such as return on cost or cash on cash, or they're going to look at a long-term metric, internal rate of return or return on equity. And so if you kind of get into the weeds of the financial feasibility, which by no means we're expecting you to do, but if you're interested in it, it clearly states that it must meet at least one short-term metric and one long-term metric to be hit and deemed financially feasible. So in terms of kind of what that means in terms of the results, our consultants looked at rental, uninclusionary, for sale, and then the linkage fee. And just two sort of pieces to note here. I will just note that the right-hand column here, the contract rents, we're looking at a mix of units, but we just wanted to give you an example of what that rent would be for a one-bedroom unit at that income level. But as you can see, the deeper the AMI, the fewer proportion of the units. The vast majority of the city is considered a typical market for purposes of feasibility, whereas high-cost markets are really kind of those areas with really high land values, high zoning entitlement, and the highest rents achieved. And so that's really going to be the downtown central business district, Golden Triangle, Union Station, and portions of Cherry Creek. So just as you can see, these are what was found to be feasible. And so theoretically, the city could pursue a policy that requires 12% of units to be affordable at 80% AMI. Or, for example, an alternative could be, 8% of units at 60% AMI. So that's kind of where it lands on the rental. As it relates to for sale or ownership housing, as you can see, we tested a slightly higher income range there. And as such, we can, leverage a greater proportion, but you're going to be having kind of higher for sale prices for that. But generally, rental is going to serve at a deeper affordability level than ownership. And so this analysis helps us to differentiate between the two appropriately. And then lastly is the linkage fee. So quick reminder, the linkage fee, because it's a form of an impact fee, does require a legal nexus to show that proportional demand of that new development. And so what we have here in this column is that nexus analysis that was done in 2016, because all the figures are staying well within that. We didn't update that, but we did update the financial feasibility. As you can see, our current linkage fee is fairly low. In industrial, less than $1, and in our commercial, it's less than $2. What the financial feasibility found was that in typical submarkets, up to $7 in some prototypes and $9 in others could be supported and still financially feasible. And then in high cost submarkets where we're anticipating high rise structures, an even greater fee could be achieved there as well. And the note is on here, but I'll just sort of reinforce this. Financial feasibility doesn't necessarily drive policy. We're not saying as the city that that is the outcome, but it's a really important piece for us to consider and balance. I see Gertie's hand just popped up. I'll go to the next slide, Gertie, but I want to make sure that I can answer your question if you have one there. This is the last slide here, and since I did just want this to be kind of a quick update in terms of what you guys can expect to see over the next month or two. So we are wanting to get that proposed policy approach out here in about the next week or so. It'll be released prior to that next advisory committee meeting, which is on October 7th. Ian Tafoya is on the advisory committee serving INC ZAP. So I would certainly, recommend talking to him and making sure that any of your feedback is certainly heard, in addition to, of course, that's not the only way to share feedback, but if you want to listen in on that conversation, they are more in depth. We'll get into a lot more details, and it's going to have, I think, a pretty robust conversation at that one. So if you want to join, you can certainly register. Details are on the project webpage. We'll also be going to City Council's Budget and Policy Committee meeting on the 18th, as well as the Denver Planning Board. Both of those are televised on Channel 8, so you can either watch them live or after the fact. And then we'll come back to INC ZAP on October 23rd. We're also working to get a series of community focus groups specific to particular topics scheduled into October and early November, as well as the industry is an important piece of this. Industry is implementing many of these things, and so we've also been doing some outreach to those various organizations like the Builders Association or NAOP or the Downtown Denver Partnership and such. And then we will continue doing kind of bi-weekly community office hours, which allow for folks to just have a more informal one-on-one conversation with staff. So with that, I'm going to stop just sharing my screen and just make sure that there aren't any questions that would be helpful to clarify.
This is Gertie. Can you hear me?
You're a little bit quiet, but let me just turn up my audio.
Can you hear me now better?
Yeah, thank you. Yep.
Thank you very, very much for this presentation. I have to confess, you talk very, very fast, and I'm not sure I understood everything of what you're saying, but for me, it is a very important topic because in our neighborhood, there are proposals to rezone part of our neighborhood. And my concern is that when you have a distinct differentiation between residential development and commercial development. And we have a proposal in our neighborhood where the developer owner came to our neighborhood and said he knows we want affordable housing, but he wants to rezone from multi-unit to Main Street. And we suggested RX, which requires commercial on the first floor and anything above that to be residential. How would that fit into this thing that you've got? Because it's just very frustrating to me because the developer is telling us that they wouldn't mind going RS and RX, and community planning and development recommended Main Street. Community planning and development is telling me that no, they didn't recommend Main Street. That's what the developer came to us with. And my concern is that it's at a location where affordable housing makes a great deal of sense, but because he can make more money with commercial zoning throughout the whole building, we are not getting the leverage to require residential above that first floor commercial. Does my question make sense? It's a combination of a couple of frustrations.
Yeah, I certainly hear that, and I'm not familiar with that specific thing as I don't particularly work in individual applicant driven rezonings. My kind of role is broader policy, but to just sort of speak to your concern on that, both RX and Main Street both allow for a fully 100% residential development to occur. The biggest kind of difference between those two, and I'm speaking generally since I'm not familiar with this particular context, but RX limits your uses above the first floor to only residential uses. And so, but you could also just have residential on the ground floor as well. And so I think it's just important to note that it could be fully residential in either outcome. That being said, in terms of how it kind of would relate to this program, say if they did intend to do a mixed use development, so maybe some retail on the ground floor and commercial above, or excuse me, residential above, what that would effectively mean is that they would pay a linkage fee for the portion of commercial on the ground floor. And then the portion of the building that's residential, the mandatory requirement for affordable housing would apply, because we're kind of assessing the impacts of both of them. So they wouldn't pay the linkage fee for the whole development because they're building those affordable units. They would pay it for that proportional commercial amount. And so what the policy is kind of attempting to do is still ensure that we are capturing the impacts of any new development in terms of its needs and demands for affordable housing, and that they're appropriately approaching that. So I probably didn't fully address your concerns particular to this site, and I would encourage you to continue conversations with the CPD staff working on that. Generally speaking, what we do really try to do is respond to what the applicant is coming in with, but also make sure that they're understanding how that is implementing the recommended plan policies for that area. And so that's where sometimes maybe some of that flexibility and discussion comes in.
So in that case, the development, if he gets his Main Street zoning and comes in, is he with the plans that he submits to CPD and to council for the rezoning, would he be paying a greater fee, so to speak? That's a term of art, I know, but would he be penalized more? I don't know how else to say it. If he goes commercial above the first floor, or or not?
So it depends on kind of when he's submitting his what we call site development plan, and that's kind of your plan for your specific proposal. If he submits today with the current system in place, commercial does have a higher fee than say residential. It's 183 per square foot compared to 161 per square foot. That being said, in the future system, it has a different impact, because instead of paying a fee, you're building units. So you don't have that upfront cost of needing to give the city X million dollars. But instead, you're taking a loss on your rental revenues over the next 99 years. And so they affect the projects differently. So I think, from a policy perspective, we're not necessarily trying to say, we got you and you're getting to one outcome, but rather let's make sure that we're proportionally kind of impacting all development. I will just note that right now, the commercial market is kind of in the tank. I was just touring a recent project over off the Welton corridor, and they originally had planned to have 2 stories of office in an industrial build or in a residential building primarily, and they are now in the process of converting all of that because all of their leases fell through just with the work from home. So while I can't speak to what the developer is doing, I would just note that right now residential is far more attractive to the development community than commercial these days.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So, Analiese, I know that you had a hard stop for an appointment. I do see that there are some other hands up. I just want to respect to you.
I texted them and said I'll be there at 10:15. So I'll go for about 6 more minutes and try to be brief in my response.
And you'll be back next month. And any sort of written things from Miles, Adrian, anyone wants to get that to me, we can make sure it gets answered. I think Miles had his hand up next, and I think David, and then Adrian.
Thanks, Analiese, for presenting. Can you talk about what just a cost difference would be, how this fee would impact the existing fee versus the proposed fee, on just a rough example of what would change? And then the next question is how is this going to be managed over time? And because the city's had some issues with trying to manage some low-cost housing. So if you could answer that, it'd be great.
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of, the impact, it's kind of hard to quantify. Once again, we're not necessarily looking at, are you losing $1 million due to this or whatever else? The easiest kind of comparison is when we look at what's called net operating income. So it's another term that developers use. But when we compare kind of the loss in net operating income from, say, a market rate unit to an affordable income restricted unit, say at 60% area median income, that's a unit for someone making about $48,000 a year. You're looking on average, dependent upon your development type, at about a per unit loss annually of about $13,000. So you multiply that times, say they're needing to provide 10 units or so, and that's the year over year financial hit. In the long term, though, that number is going to grow because market rate rents tend to increase at a higher rate than income restricted rents. And so you basically have that widening trajectory there, as I try to make a graphic with my hand. And so, we can look at it kind of from a short year, but that's where the IRR calculation does look at it from a long-term hold perspective. So it is a notable, ask that the city is making in terms of these affordability requirements. The linkage fee in some ways is easier to quantify because it's just that difference in cost, but it really will depend on where, the city lands in terms of what fee we actually think is appropriate. It might not be right where feasibility comes in. To your second question around, what's different, the city doesn't have a good track record. I've read that auditor report now a couple of times, and that was related to the former inclusionary housing ordinance that the city had. And a lot of it was that there was a really strict, what we call an administrative cap. And so that is funds that go to support the staffing and the infrastructure and the software to appropriately track it. And essentially, there wasn't the appropriate staffing to the proportional number of units to allow us to effectively track and monitor those over time. We've had a lot of lessons learned through that and have now bi-weekly meetings internally with our host compliance team to appropriately staff up. So that was part of our budget ask for 2022. And also now there's so many better tools and resources and kind of software tracking pieces that allow for us to, I think, have a much better track record. But this was certainly a key consideration for the city to really ensure that we had the resources in place to ensure that there was success in maintaining the units for the long term and not losing those over time. Then I think, was it David and then Adrian?
Yeah, so I guess my biggest thing, so I actually work for a real estate developer, a relatively small one here in town, or well, depends on what you consider small. But anyway, my biggest question is, if you've got somebody, let's say, building 8 townhomes and they're required to have 12% of it be 80% AMI, so one of those townhomes becomes affordable, that's great. But when you've got, like, in my mind, there's a pretty big difference between a developer who, let's say, is building 8 units or 20 units versus a developer who's building 100 units, or in some cases, like upwards of close to 1,000 units in a complex, as we sometimes see happens here in Denver. And I'm wondering if is it something where there's ever been discussion of, hey, developers who are this size pay this amount, and developers who are building at this size, like when you've got a national company that's got really, really deep pockets and can put up 1,000 units, like maybe requiring more of them than, let's say, a homegrown developer who's putting a couple million of their own dollars into building 8 units.
Yeah, it's a great question. And the former program in Denver did have a much higher threshold. It was 30 units. But what that meant is that the vast majority of new development that occurs in the city is either larger multifamily projects of 100+ units, or it's a lot of those infill townhome, smaller multi-unit developments. And so what that meant in the past is that really the only areas in which that program applied was in Central Park, Bowery, Gateway Green Valley Ranch. It really didn't have enough applicability to get those units into kind of our center city neighborhoods where we have great access to transportation, jobs, and other important services to support people. So that was in part why we really wanted to explore kind of a lower threshold. That being said, because it is a proportion that does scale, that's kind of built in. But not too many cities build in a lot of different breaks based off of that. And it's certainly something that we can explore more, but it's not something that we're currently, putting on the table. Is, wherever you create that break, you're going to get people kind of trying to skirt under it. And I think the important piece is, all development, regardless of size, is still contributing to affordable housing. One's default is just going to be a fee per square foot, where the other one's default is going to be building that unit. But remember, House Bill 1117 does require us to have alternative compliance. And so what that does mean is there could be an outcome in which that townhome developer does maybe choose to pay a fee in lieu because that is kind of better for their business model. We'll certainly be calibrating that appropriately to get the outcomes that we want, but that's an option there.
Cool. No, that makes sense to me. It's not saying, oh, small developers shouldn't have to build any affordable or they should have low rates. It's more if, you've got your AMLI, those guys are, worth $100 billion probably across the country. Like they could afford 20%. Whereas that could hurt a really small developer going, you need to provide 20%. The 12% is something that's manageable per your guys' analysis. So, yeah.
I see the Adrian's question in there. So the financial feasibility analysis to the no free lunch thing. So developer, you're taking a $13,000 hit per the unit. Where are you making up that cost in other places? And on average, when we've looked at kind of academic research, what tends to happen is that those market rate units see an increase on average of about 3%. Slightly higher, but they're not fully offsetting the cost. What happens is that the developer typically will find other measures or other means to cut costs. Land prices might adjust a little bit based off of that as well. But in part, why market rate housing is called market rate is because it's really what the market is willing to pay for that housing. And so the developers know that they can't increase rents by 10 or 20% because the market's not willing to pay that. And so it kind of artificially sort of limits it to really, no more than a 3% increase, which on, a typical, say, 1 or 2 bedroom, we're talking about $30 or $40 a month. Someone who's earning, $90,000 a year can likely afford that adjustment appropriately. But it's an important consideration that we're certainly being cognizant of, because we don't just want to shift the burden from one population to another. It's really important that we're cognizant of that. So I appreciate the question. All right. I'm gonna jet. I do apologize for a shorter time here with you today, but I will be back for as long as you'll have me about a month from now.
Well, we really appreciate it, Analiese. Thank you for squeezing us in around your meetings. I really appreciate it. And Adrian, I copied your question here, and we're keeping a running list of questions in regards to this that we can take to the meeting. But thanks again, Analiese.
Thank you. Ciao.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Our next speaker is Alfonso Espino from the GES Coalition, here to talk to us about some initiatives that they've been working on, in particular, their vision for their community planning and some of the issues that they're running into. If you hadn't seen, I'm wearing one of their shirts now. They have a plan regarding land trusting and some of their work. We've had them here at committee over the years, and we had several requests to bring them back. And so Alfonso is here to participate, give his presentation. And I believe he might have some questions for our committee about zoning, because he was pretty excited to speak to people who think about zoning all the time. So Alfonso, I'll give it to you. And I made you co-host so that you can share a screen if you need to.
Thank you, Ian. Sorry about that. I was having trouble unmuting myself. Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. My name is Alfonso Espino. I am a community organizer with the GES Coalition and a lifelong resident of these neighborhoods. So very happy to be here. Thank you, Ian, for that opportunity to speak to this group. I just have a very short presentation. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I also have to get running to something later today. So I'll be mindful of my time here, but I do have this presentation. And Ian, do I have the ability to share my screen? And I'll also drop a link to this presentation.
I made you a co-host, so you should have the ability.
Cool. So give me just a second, everyone. Just bear with me. I'll also drop a link to this presentation because there's a couple of links inside of the presentation to articles and things like that. So I want to make sure that y'all have access to that. All right, I hope everybody can see that. Just a quick thumbs up from anybody would be appreciated to make sure that I'm not starting a presentation that no one can actually see yet.
You can see.
That was a yes. Got like 2 people there. Cool. Awesome. Thank you, David. So once again, thank you very much for having me here. And shout out to Ian for wearing the shirt. Our shirts say our hood, our community, and our land, because we believe that after years of exploitation, marginalization, and very purposeful underdevelopment of our communities, we should have not only the say, but the ability to create the vision of what our community needs in the publicly owned land that is at the heart of the National Western Center, which sits between our 3 neighborhoods of Glovo, and Elyria, and Swansea. So, you know, I think I'm here to really present about that, but something that has to be addressed as well is, you know, the upcoming bond, because the National Western Center has 2 ticket items on the, they take up the most amount of money that is being requested out of a bond to go towards them once again. So, you know, just want to keep in mind, you know, when the city are talking about recovery, we're here asking people like us, communities like ours are asking recovery for who? And so our problem with the bond is that in this year, it was a very rushed bond package proposal. Historically, these, especially past couple of decades, these happen about every 10 years is when the city typically tries to issue a bond. They rushed that process by about 6 years, if I'm not mistaken. The last one was in 2017, if I'm not misremembering. So it was a very rushed proposal with basically no community input. It was, especially in reference to big ticket items like this, they only called upon so-called experts defined by the city with pretty much little to none, if that can be said at all, community input from not only our communities, but overall the city as a whole. Nobody really got to have a lot of input, as opposed to previous bond packages, which had committees drawn up and very active participation from the population of Denver. And also, you know, we don't need an arena. We don't need a new arena. The National Western does not need a new arena. You know, they keep saying that they need this to have year-round events. As someone that's lived down the street from them, they always have had the ability to do that. Of course, they want a more modern stadium. That's a different question. But does the city of Denver as a whole really need a 10,000 seat arena in the middle of a pandemic that is still ongoing, a looming housing crisis, a looming eviction crisis, and a complete lack of services, public infrastructure. There's not enough public infrastructure, especially concerning health. Our communities know that well for too long. And the mayor's own survey about the bond has showed that most people in Denver want solutions for the housing crisis. And very few of them, according to the city's own survey, which has been linked in here, wanted to build new infrastructure. So right here, this is a couple of key takeaways from the city's Rise Together Denver community input on the economic recovery. They did do a survey, very short-lived. And the key takeaway number one is that people want housing. And second, the key takeaway is that people want new business owners and job seekers. And the third takeaway is infrastructure priorities, and we could get into that a little bit. But the top priority by far, as you can see here, is housing and support for people experiencing homelessness. Communities like ours know that very well. They bear a big brunt, and of course downtown and the neighborhoods surrounding there, like the Golden Triangle and whatnot, have had to bear the most weight for our unhoused neighbors, because especially downtown is where all the services are located. And people want support to pay for housing needs. And that's what an economic recovery for most of Denver citizens looks like. So related to infrastructure, most people in Denver, when they think of infrastructure and issuing a bond for it, as you can see right here, the preference is to fix something that's outdated or improve something that already exists. 10%, about 10% of those surveyed in the city's own survey would like to see something new built. So there's that as well. And we also, have to point out the fact that this development model, especially related to an arena and just the campus as a whole, is, as we're going to be seeing, based on an outdated development process on a very risky economic model because of the pandemic. Things have to change. We can't keep doing the things the way that we've been doing them here in the city, really as a nation. But here in the city, I think it'll be very apparent that we can't really be basing our whole economy on things like tourism. We need some safe measures, and more than anything, we need the infrastructure like housing readily available for everybody, so that when we come into hard economic times, people have the most basic of necessities that everybody should have access to. Everybody should be able to afford, like health and housing. And the mayor just continues to ignore the recommendations of the city's own feasibility study on the site. And they also, I think most importantly, have no formal plan to even build the arena. They don't have any plan for the rest of the acreage that they own now at the National Western Center. It's around 47 acres that are still left, that are unplanned for, unaccounted for in that manner. And our community has something to say about that. And just a quick reminder that the National Western has already received $865 million in public funding to date. Our communities worked with them to really try to push in 2015 for the Initiative 2C to get their funding from tourism and lodging tax. That was based on broken promises made by the administration, Mayor Hancock. One of those most apparent examples are things like, that this influx of public funding would help our communities do things like complete the sidewalk grid, something that money was created for. There's an account somewhere in the city where they have the funds to do so, because they have no plan, because they have no initiative for our communities. Those sidewalks have yet to come through, and it's not really surprising, but it's just more of the same. And I would also just say that the city has prevented a meaningful partnership with the community to actually take root. This right here is a picture of one of the what the Friends of the National Western sent out when the community came out against their plan to send it off to the bond for the arena. And they believe that we don't have the best interest of Denver in mind when really it's projection, and the city is and the National Western are those that have their own interest in mind, and they have no concern, especially for the surrounding communities around the area. Because of that, we have formally rejected this, organized neighbors with the GS coalition, not only as unjust and inequitable, but also it's time to really envision something new. And we believe that through a true community partnership, which the city has never really formalized or made the initiative to take with organized neighbors, we believe that through building this mechanism, through building a creative partnership with the community, instead of just asking for input, having us as partners sitting down at the table, especially around something as important as public land, is something that the city desperately needs. The city, the developers lack creativity to solve the issues that are most pertinent to our communities. And there's also the value of the experience and the knowledge that's been garnered here over decades of oppression, of marginalization, of exploitation of our communities, for us to also voice what the solutions can be related to the problems that we have historically faced in our communities. And so more related to our campaign, I think the idea of demanding that this land not only remain public land, the city's initial plan for it was a P3 model, and basically a giveaway of all this acreage of land to a private developer in exchange for building the arena. That plan is dead, and we believe that not only should it remain public land, but it should be put into the community's hands. We have a community land trust here to be able to steward the land, to be able to drive down the cost of living in these homes, to be able to purchase homes in our community. That land trust already has homes built, has more in the pipeline, and is proving to be a tool in our community that can be used and practiced throughout in order to secure that affordability without having to rely on any private developers to do so, without having to rely so much on the city to do anything about it either. This is a completely grassroots initiative that is proving that it works. We're proving that the public ownership of our land is not only possible, but in my opinion, a responsibility, especially in communities like ours that have been historically underdeveloped and marginalized, which is why we are in the precarious situation that we are, where most of our neighbors are at risk of being displaced or losing their homes altogether and having nowhere to go to. There's very few places left in the city that we can afford at all. We probably can't afford most of it already as it is. And we want to be part of building something for our community, something that we know that we need, something that we know that we can build. And the National Western Center acquired most of this public land by taking it from our community in the first place. It has continuously, especially the National Western, in partnership with the city, has used tools like eminent domain to forcibly take land and homes from our community. Some of our coalition members are the latest victims of the city in this latest redevelopment of the National Western, and it's a continued history. And that stacked with the fact that this isn't the only place in our communities that this has happened, as most people well know by now and can see, the expansion of I-70 also took, through eminent domain, a lot of over 60 homes, 60 families displaced just like that overnight. So the city and the National Western have a responsibility to our community vision, and our community vision is reparations through community ownership of the land. And that really brings me to what is, I hope you can have access to the link. I dropped it in the chat. If somebody didn't receive it, please, so you can click through these links. But this is a picture or a image from our fold out. The coalition has partnered and hired a nationally recognized urban architecture and planning firm called Hector Design, which has experience and a history of working with communities to really start planning process in a more grassroots way, inverting the process that the city embarks on community planning. And we want to provide that pathway for economic growth, not only for our communities, but for the city, really offering a different alternative, a new tool that similar communities can use to uplift themselves. And unlike the city's plan, the community plan would be developed through a detailed, equitable planning process with the community as the equity partners. And I say this often, but we being communities like ours that have been historically impacted by the city's, I wouldn't call it incompetence, but very purposeful exploitation of communities like ours. Communities like that are the ones that should be deciding what justice looks like, what reparations look like, where restorative justice looks like, because it can't be on the city, the perpetrator of these crimes. It can't be the National Western, an entity that has benefited from that history, to be the ones deciding what does that look like for our community. Communities should be at the forefront of these visions, creating them, and we should be the ones deciding not only what we need to fill in the gaps, but also what the vision is to really get to a place where justice can be said has been done. With that, that's most of what I have for you, and free to answer a couple of questions before I have to jump off. I did have a couple of questions I wanted to ask, but I'd rather just let you ask questions to me, and I could submit my own questions to Ian, see if someone could answer them on paper.
Alfonso, I'm wondering if you could click on that link and show us a little of your community directed plan.
Yeah, so this will take you to our equitable development planner. This is something that we put together over the past year, really to contextualize the inequitable development process, not only here in Denver, but really, throughout the nation. And you could download our PDF. This is not our plan, but this is the plan for the plan, right? This is our foldout that we have been sharing. It has some information about the triangle of public land that I've been talking about, and how to find out more. Because really what it's going to be is the hope is to get not only the process led by our neighbors, but have it be widespread throughout the 3 communities in partnership, in coalition with other groups of marginalized people in Denver, like our Black and Indigenous communities, which have also suffered the most, especially in recent times, when it comes to the topic of displacement and housing and health insecurities. So that's what our plan is. You can read a little bit about it here. But essentially it's to invert the relationship that the city has with the community and allowing us to lead the process.
Miles, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Alfonso. Good point you're making. It was my understanding the redevelopment of National Western, what the city was doing was giving a developer land to redevelop to offset the cost of the redevelopment. So basically, it looks like maybe the city has subsidized quite a bit, but it was kind of like that was the big idea, was they would let the developer develop something and then the city would have to pay less, basically. And then, so if you can comment on that, if that's true or not. And then your process, I've been involved with some large planning processes in the city, and it seems like the planners have one goal is to get it passed. And in the processes I've been involved with, they just didn't want to talk about some things, or engagement was done and then they could statistically say later, oh, we've had these meetings and we have consensus, or we have support, but the questions they ask are so generic that it's very easy to take out of context and people really don't understand what's being proposed. So how would your planning process be different than what the city's doing now?
Sure. So to answer your first question, about the partnership with private developers at the site is that was so what they were specifically planning to do was these remaining 47 acres, the campus itself is hundreds of acres in size. Let's see if I can click on this real quick. But most of this is accounted for in the new partnership between CSU, the National Western Center Authority, Stock Show, and the City of Denver. And this portion called the triangle is what has been left unplanned. The rest of the site of the National Western Campus has been paid for essentially through the lodging tax. That's how they've been doing a lot of the remodel, the I think phase 1 and 2 part of this redevelopment. What the city was specifically asking for in a partnership, in a public-private partnership, was in exchange for building the arena, specifically building the public arena, which is part of the framework agreement that these 4 different entities, the National Western Stock Show, the City of Denver, CSU, and the new National Western Center Authority, which will become the caretaker essentially. In the framework agreement, the Stock Show asked for an arena. So the city has to, at some point, there's no definition about when it's like there's no set due date, right? I think it's within like the next 15 years. They have to, it's at some point come through on their end of the agreement. So the way that they were trying to uphold that was in exchange for building this arena, they would hand over these 47 or so acres that are left in the triangle to a private developer to basically do as they please. And obviously the developers, there was 2 in mind that remain unnamed in an RFP process that was not transparent at all. Were 2 of the biggest in the country. They were never named. I have an idea who they were, but their idea was give them 47 acres public land to use in a long life lease of like over 100 years or something like that, which was renewable in exchange for building an arena and maintaining it for like 30 years or something like that, which seems like a pretty unequal exchange to me. As someone that lives here, I don't know what your opinions are on that, but that seems pretty asinine to me. But that was what they were basically bartering with the private developer to do, not to develop the rest of their plan. It was really to only develop an arena, and in exchange you get free reign on 47 acres of publicly owned land, subsidizing essentially very big multi-billion-dollar corporations profits even further. And as far as to answer your second question, I hope that I answered your first question. If I didn't, please let me know. As far as your second question goes about what would be different, I've been a part of planning processes as well, growing up here in these communities, and typically what they look like, and I'm sure you can jump in if you want, but typically what they look like is the city has overall a framework of what they think can be done, right? CPD undertakes some of that process, and then they do all these studies, and then they come to a community. Then come to a community and ask basically what is their opinion on what they have proposed, right? Sometimes it's less drawn out, and there's more room for maneuvering, but overall the city has something in mind, right? The CPD has in mind, mostly through the initiative, especially over here in these communities, under the direction of the administration on hand. In this case, Mayor Hancock's administration, right? They've played, for example, the National Western Center's master plan. They've played a big role in how that development process of the planning process looked like. And when I say we're trying to invert the process, is basically we start the process, right? We don't wait for the city to come to us. We start the process, and we as a community identify, right? We have this land, right? What do we need, right? What sort of services have we been historically lacking? What sort of infrastructure is lacking? What sort of housing is lacking? And then from there, really take on the conversation as a community about, all right, in order to achieve these things that are missing, in order to achieve these things that we envision as part of this land that's right in our communities, what do we need? What tools do we need to put into place into a planning process? And that's where zoning can come and play a big role, but also in terms of being able to achieve affordability, not only for home ownership, but for small businesses, right? For businesses in our community, people that can benefit from our own community, right? In order to drive that affordability down, we already know that our community land trust can play a big role in not only achieving affordability, but preserving it for a long time. And then obviously we need to partner with the city, especially in terms of technical assistance when it comes down to CPD, and it will need to get passed. Our hope is that our plan would be amended into the National Western Center's master plan, because it's the big gap. Really, what we're offering is to help complete the process with them, in partnership, and us at the front of the table, not the back of the room asking questions, but leading the process in partnership with the city. Making things feasible, but also really looking to cultivate and create the vision that the community sees, because there's a value in the experience. There's a value in having us as a partner leading this process, because we know what we need. And as I was alluding to earlier, the victims need to be the ones that decide what justice looks like in a case like this. So I hope that answers your two questions.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Alfonso. I think the city sees itself as being very innovative and cutting edge. So I wish you well. I think trying these different processes just to see how the city can improve would be innovative. And I wish you luck on that.
Thank you. And yeah, and we hope that, that this is successful. We hope that the city at some point at the end of the day, let's say all goes well, our campaign works, remains publicly owned land. We want this to be a tool that other communities could then use across the city, in different cities, to really invert the planning process and really hit at the heart of what people need. So our hope is that this works, and we have confidence that it would, but also that it could be used as a model across the city and even have a further reaching impact.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Alfonso, I have a couple questions for you. I was wondering if you could talk just to our group about really your concerted effort with bilingual outreach and how that process works to engage different groups of people in your community. Because I know, all across the city, there's pockets of groups of enclaves of communities that speak other languages. And, we in INC are always trying to reach more people. And so I was wondering if you could touch on that as an organizer.
Sure. So one of the strengths of the coalition, of the GS coalition, is that we are made up of neighbors. We're made up of the diversity that is our neighborhood. So in our own group, we have the languages that are needed here in our community, which is why we are an important asset to something like a planning process. When we do outreach, we're reaching, especially in terms of language barriers, we are reaching across those barriers because we have in our ranks and file, in our community, the community that is organizing reflects our community. And so for us, we don't struggle to do outreach. We don't struggle with that because we are made up of our community. We are our community. So not only is the barrier of language not really an issue for us, and when we meet as well as a group, we always facilitate this process, right? We always have interpretation. If we don't have interpretation, if we can't secure an interpreter, we make sure that one of us is doing that. And so we have the fortune that our organized community is a reflection of our community as a whole. So that's the beauty of it, and kind of just pointing out another reason why we're of value to something like this.
Okay, I had a second question. If you could talk a little bit about, you all marched from 3 different parts of the community. You had GS all kind of united. I was wondering, you had some pictures of it, but I think it's kind of cool just to talk about community organizing in that sense to our members.
Yeah, so we kicked off our campaign officially. So as a coalition, we have been doing training. We've been planning for this campaign for well over a year. We officially kicked it off in the summer. You can see a couple of pictures at the top of this fold out of that event. But I also have one over here in the slide. Sorry, but we marched from 3 different parts of the neighborhood, and we landed at let me pull up this picture actually because it is important. At one of our coalition members, the site of his former home at National Western. The National Western left it up because they deemed it of historic value after they kicked his family out through eminent domain. Right there is where we converged at. With signs like "Our Hood, Our Land," no more theft of our land. And we had a press conference and made a declaration that we had a Grupo Mexica dancers that blessed the land. We kicked it off with the blessing of the land ceremony, and then we went on to through various community members that were there, spoke and talked about the importance of our community's land, of our vision, and declared the land as our own, as it rightfully is. And it was a very emotional day, as far as like what it took to even organize this. David, he's right there with the microphone. I don't know how good of a picture, how well you could see the picture, sorry. But this was somebody who experienced displacement twice at National Western. First, to make way for the on-ramp right there right near Brighton and York. Their family was kicked out from there like a couple of decades ago. They landed at this home, and they were once again dispossessed by the state for a second time in order to make way for the redevelopment of the campus. And they gave them in exchange what they deemed was the value of the home. And then afterwards, they went and declared it historic value and preserved the home after all. So his house is still sitting there, I think 4 or 5 years later, unoccupied, when obviously, and it really speaks as well to the lack of planning process, or really the lack of empathy on behalf of the city, right? So we marched and we converged there, and it was a very spiritual experience. Me personally being there with our community, because this is a campaign, this is a message that resonates very deeply with our community. Especially in very recent memory, we all know somebody that lost a home to either National Western or to the I-70 redevelopment. So it was not only meaningful, but it was a very beautiful experience despite the circumstances.
Adrian, I see you have your hand up now.
I do. Alfonso, thank you so much for presenting, but more importantly, for you and your group putting in the enormous amount of effort that everybody listening to this morning has firsthand experience about. I think, looking at the names, I think everybody has been involved in a campaign for or against what the city's doing, or the state, or anything else. So you're talking to hardened veterans. The question that jumps into my mind, apart from thanking you, is what can we do to help? You're presenting to Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation, an overarching group of neighborhoods, all of whom have been pissed off in the past with various actions of the city, and all of whom have fought with varying degrees of success to get their vision, or at least their vision, incorporated into what we are doing as a city. We obviously have all huge different things. Is money an issue for you guys? And if so, how can we help get some of that? And is publicity an issue? How can we do that? So, spend a couple of minutes giving us your wish list of of, you know, how big of a check we need to write for you, for example.
Thank you, Adrian. I think there's like four main things that come to my mind. When I think about how this group could help us. I think one of them is first of all endorsing our process. I think it would be very meaningful and show that our plan isn't crazy. First of all, because I know it's not, right? But really help to uplift and legitimize our plan from a perspective outside of our own communities. I think that that's important. Financially, yes, of course, we can always use some help with fundraising. We're planning some fundraising events here in the near future, and as well as on our website, gescoalition.com, you can help. There's a donation tab right there. But we're planning, ways to raise funds. We actually just recently announced that we did receive not a large grant, but a meaningful grant for about $67,000 from a national campaign for reparations called Liberated Capital. We are in touch with other communities, other groups across the country already that are working on similar cases for reparations at their own local levels. So we did receive a small, relatively small grant compared to what a lot of those other groups got. But we of course have a long battle ahead of us. We're not only fighting the city, of course. I think, as some of you may well know, the city has a lot of big partners, and especially CRL Associates, their favorite lobbying group. They already created the Friends of the National Western. So of course funding will be of big help. A third way is publicity. We did manage to get from our kickoff event in July to the present moment, we've gotten some pretty decent media coverage so far. But I think the thing that, and I don't know if this is the right group to ask, because I don't know what everybody's experience or connections are, but we think that an effective way that we know that the city, specifically the mayor Hancock, can be pressured is from a more national media attention perspective, because we know that he has ambitions beyond mayor in the future. I disagree with his ambitions, but he has the ambitions nonetheless. And we know that in order to get more effective media pressure on the city, we need more national coverage. So if anybody knows somebody or has an idea for some meaningful national coverage on the issue, on our plan, on our vision, that'd be great. And I think the last thing is, when we get to the actual planning process, I think that a group like this would be very valuable with the discussion, helping the community really discuss when we're taking our vision, right, of what the things that we need and materializing it through tools like zoning. I think that a group like this could be very useful and very helpful to our community to help inform and allow us to see the horizons of the tools at our disposal in order to try to effectively actually materialize these things to come into fruition. So those are a couple of the ways that I think that this group can help. And of course, I think the last one, I said last one would be, in my opinion, voting no on that arena. And not only because it has no benefit for our communities, but because, if the city is going to issue a debt, that's going to come back on us, really, right? We know that those bonds come back for us to uplift, to uphold the taxpayers. 40% of this bond that they're asking for, over 40%, is money specifically for that arena and for the public market attached to that arena. Right? 40% of the bond that they're asking for is just for an arena that we don't need, an arena and money that could be better used elsewhere, that their own surveys show should be used elsewhere. So that's the last way I think that you can support our community, you can support our process, you could support our campaign. So thank you for those questions, Adrian. I hope that you find those useful, and people and this group can do as they may with that information.
Alfonso, I'm sorry, I was writing something when you were giving out the numbers. What is the breakdown of the total bond amount versus what is being dedicated to the arena?
I wish I had it up with me, but the city is essentially asking for 200 million in total for National Western Center on the bond. They at first wanted to lump it in with the other public projects like the libraries, like building new libraries and stuff. City council separated them, so now it's a separate ballot measure. But in total, for the National Western, they're asking for $200 million in bond issuance, which, by the way, isn't even enough to build the arena. They'd still have to go and find more funds elsewhere to fill that gap. They also don't have a plan for it. But from what I last remember, what is going to the ballot, 200 million makes up about 40%, somewhere between 40 and 45% of the total money being asked to be issued in a bond.
Thanks, Alfonso. Gertie, I see your hands up. I also see a motion. I'm putting it into a doc. Gertie, I'll let you go first. I do want to say, as far as the bond goes, I have come out against the bond, so I want to be very transparent about that. But one thing of note that came to my awareness just a couple of days ago was that a large portion of it is about realigning that train track there. And it just is, the community of GS has asked for a realigning of train tracks that literally run behind rec centers and schools. But the money here is rather for a stadium instead of for the people. So go ahead, Gertie.
My question is more, although Alfonso, I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and I am appalled that the man was removed from his house and then they declared it historically valuable and they haven't given the house back to him. I find that very distressing. But my question is more to Ian and to Chris. Have we had a presentation from the other side on this issue? Because traditionally, ZAP did not take a position on something without hearing both sides. And I really do think that we need to hear both sides, even though right now I am totally sympathetic with the position that Alfonso and the Elyria Swansea Global folks are doing.
I would agree with Gertie. I think that there are some issues that have been stated here today that we need to hear from the other side as to what, if any, is a plan that they're going to address these issues. And I know that this is an ongoing thing because that community has been dealing with the city for decades and seemingly not getting any type of meaningful response, but maybe this is the line in the sand that those type of a necessary response can be had from the city, because now they're actually coming and they're asking the taxpayers to support a bond issue that would have this as part of it. But I would agree with Gertie. I think that we need to get the other side in to be able to hear from them and then to be able to ask them some pointed questions.
Okay, Robert, and Gertie, you hear your point. We did have, and I'd have to go back in the records, we of course have had National Western to ZAP to talk about their master plan. I don't, as this resolution is written, it has nothing to do with the bond. It actually has to do with the master plan. And I do believe the bond issues are coming forward in our general meeting. So I do think that conversation will be had. I'm open, of course, to leading this in any direction that the group wants it to go. But I think the master plan has been presented. We could bring them back, of course. So I'll leave it there with those details and let you all decide.
Yes, but the master plan was presented with the PPP. I would like to get an update on what their overall game plan is now that the private portion of a significant piece of the land has been removed.
How do others feel about that?
I don't want to interrupt, but I think that's a great idea. And I think that you'll be kind of shocked at their response and their answers.
Let's get Brad Buchanan out here and have him tell us.
Yep. I hope that can happen, y'all.
I think that's a good idea.
So should we, do the people who introduced the resolution, it looks like AE was on here presenting a resolution. And then it was seconded by Adrian. So how do you all feel about it, those who presented it? Because I definitely want to honor that process.
I'm cool with it.
My concern is that we're sort of on a deadline. I mean, the election is in roughly what, 5.5 weeks? And it's a question of, can we get somebody speaking on this? And are we going to say, oh, if they won't speak, then we can't take a position? Or do we need to set a deadline? Hey, you guys need to, we write up some sort of list of questions and say, you need to answer these in a written format in the next 10 days, or we are taking position without any input from you. Because I don't think I think that it's worth asking the other side for answers to questions we have, but I don't think we should allow them to slow walk our process.
I agree with that.
Agreed.
Well, does that change a way you would want to author a resolution? Are we saying we want to put that off? I guess this is kind of an interesting scenario. The next meeting, of course, that INC has is on the 9th. You know, if we advanced it from ZAP, it would still have the opportunity to go forward. We would have to get those information, but doesn't that put us into November? But it's not about the bond, it's about the master plan. So I don't know if we're on the same deadline, David, to be honest. If the bond passes, of course, like, it empowers the other side, you know, saying they have the financing now, but I don't know. Alfonso, what is kind of the timeline so we can understand that?
So for the bond, yeah, it's pretty much in November. But as far as like an actual planning process, you know, the arena doesn't actually, it's not part of any planning process really. It's kind of this standalone thing that the city committed to in that framework agreement, and they're trying to use a very rushed bond process in order to fulfill that. Even though they still have a long time before they actually have to build that arena or build anything like that. But a planning process overall, especially like the one that our campaign is talking about, is not tied to the bond.
Mr. Chair, however, I would augment the earlier comments that this is a follow the money situation. My experience is that you want to defeat something like this, or at least change the conversation, you need to throttle the bucks. And so I see the bond as being the end of this process in terms of meaningful input. And I would strongly urge our group to, essentially try and get that conversation, among other things, to Alfonso's number 5 point, which is to vote no. And that doesn't kill the thing. It just simply gives the opportunity for meaningful input, which apparently hasn't really occurred. So I think we have the classic problem at INC, which is that we're considering this at a point where there is barely time for us to undertake the standard INC approach that Gertie points out of a balanced discussion. And I would also point out that we have heard about this process in the past in this body. And so, one could make an argument that Alfonso's presentation is the other part of the balance to that, which at the time was unbalanced. So anyway, I think we go forward or we do nothing. Go forward with the vote and get it in front of the general membership at the next general membership meeting.
Gertie, I see your hands back up.
Yes, I have a question. I have two thoughts. One is, who is the person who is making this motion? I don't know who Borderlines is.
Analiese,
Oh, it's AE. Wonderful to have you. I
Yeah,
haven't,
it's
I haven't,
yeah, Gertie.
I
I
haven't,
always-
you know, these aliases always escape me. I agree with what Adrian is saying. I guess my point is that and I realize those of you who are planning these meetings have a lot to do, but I think it is important in planning and setting up the agenda for these items that whenever possible, we should have both sides at the same meeting, simply because we then run into these problems where it's too
Yes.
late to get both sides of the story before there is a timeline that precludes meaningful action.
I think that that should be a concept moving forward of how we deal with issues in general. Now, I want to add, I don't often agree with Adrian on a lot of things that he says, but in this particular case, I think that the higher level issue is that with regards to the bond vote, or the bond issue that's being put up for a vote, is that there just is a lack of information on specifics about how the money is going to be spent, to what purposes and things of that nature. And if that's not addressed in and of itself, regardless of support or non-support of the GES coalition, I think that INC, if we don't get a response, I think that INC will say, well, without information, we can't support, what you're asking for. I mean, they're like asking, just give us a gigantic credit card and we'll let you know what the details are later. And we all know that the city has a track record of, not getting the details right on the back end.
Very polite, Robert.
Well, okay, so I have a question just for a process going forward. I was only informed yesterday that there may be a motion. Before, we were just thinking we were bringing a topic. So we may have to just talk about how that goes forward, because it was just yesterday when we sent out the agenda, I got an email saying it might happen. The person who sent it isn't even here. So I try to give as much warning, but we might want to talk about that going forward in the process of how to organize for that. I'm open to that, of course. So I'm not sure where that leaves us in the process. Adrian, I heard you say you're okay with pulling it.
No, I'm not okay with pulling it. I'm just okay with having an additional discussion. But the reality is there's no time. So in those circumstances, I would suggest that we have a motion on the table and we should vote on it.
So
I
now
second that.
who's seconding it? David?
Yep.
I'm gonna put it up on the screen here just so people can read it. At least how it was written before. Adrian, of course, since it's your motion now, you can make changes. Can you all see it here?
No, it was actually moved by Ann Elizabeth, not me.
Oh, I thought you just moved it because you were
Oh.
pulling it down before. No, okay. Then we didn't need the other one. Okay, but this is how it was originally written. Would we like to see changes to it? Go ahead, Gertie.
I
By
think
the way,
you
it's hard
need
for me to
to
see the chat. I can't see the chat at all because I'm in my screen share.
Okay, I'm
Oh.
not putting it in the chat. I'm just saying that GES should be explained who they are. That is the Globeville Elyria Swansea Coalition, because otherwise some people like me would not know what it is.
Is it and Swansea, Alfonso, or is it just Swansea? Is it even written that way? Is it written like this?
So it's a Global Elyria Swansea Coalition organizing for health and housing justice. If you want the
Yeah, for health and housing justice.
And P should be a little P. Maybe not. I don't know. Our process should be a
That's
little.
just how it was written. That's how it was written.
I
Oh,
think
okay, all right.
Do we want to call it the property known as the triangle?
No, it's not defined. It's not defined on the drawing. No, don't do that. And the other thing is, I think that, okay, you can write that because that's the resolution that was proposed.
yeah, you could put in known as the National Western Triangle.
Yeah, because the arena is south of the interstate anyway, and it's not, my understanding of the original presentation is that's not the PPP triangle. It's in the northeast corner of the entire site, north of the interstate.
All right, can people call on who's raising their hands? Because I can only see that 2 hands are raised, but I can't see the names.
I have a question. If this passes, what happens to it? Does this committee plan on sending it to the city
No,
or just present it to the delegate meeting in October?
Well, I think immediately I'd get this to the executive board. In the past, I know committees have sent some things to the city, but I think that's for the executive board to decide on what they want to share. And yeah, it would go to October, then the conversation would be had and we'd come back in November and vote. And since it's about the master plan, that seems to be on a reasonable timeline.
Ian, this is Ann Elizabeth. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't have a hand, and I'm sorry I haven't joined the discussion. I was in a really noisy place, but I've moved. But and I'm a little hoarse. However, I appreciate the support for this. I think it would be good to. This is a section of the National Western Center acreage referred to as the triangle, and it is a designated area. So. And by passing this resolution, it essentially endorses an ongoing engaged discussion that elevates the voice of the constituency that has not been as present in the process over the years as would be called for in this, for equity and for a full imagination of what's best for all that are concerned. So I think this resolution would protect the equities in the discussions going forward for sure.
Yes, but in a sense, it's endorsing someone else's planning process that doesn't have a defined planning process. They have a plan for a plan. What is their plan? Because the way that this is written right now and what I already put in the chat is that I would vote no because whatever you're talking to is as equally undefined as what we're arguing against.
Well, the process is what is being protected. To have an inclusive process prior to the calcification of models, ideas, funding priorities, and policy is a form of egalitarian constituency or community or neighborhood or whatever you want to say most broadly, inclusiveness and engagement. So,
well, your two things have been more right on than what's appeared. So if the motion wants to be revised to include that type of language, I could get behind it. Otherwise, I'd be voting no.
Friendly amendments are definitely welcome from the discussion. Sure, go ahead.
What? Oh, you're looking for language from me? No, I think that you said it best. Your last sentence about having this address a more inclusive discussion process in revising the master plan is something that needs to be done, because right now there's too many question marks.
Is that kind of like the language you're talking about, Robert? How's that sound to you? Yeah, I could.
Yeah.
Yes.
So would that replace this part here?
Well,
No.
but I don't want to eliminate the actual. I wouldn't eliminate the whole thing.
Goes after the word triangle.
Yeah.
And so you'd say what? And a more inclusive plan
Uh-huh.
in revising.
Yes.
Yeah, I would
sounds good.
accept that as a friendly amendment.
Work for you, Robert?
Get rid of the question mark at the end.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, good point. Does the second need to accept the friendly amendment too?
Yeah, and I approve.
Excellent.
Thanks, AE.
Okay, is there any more discussion on it? Oh, I guess I have a little more discussion. So this is what I'm thinking the next steps are, and I want clarification from everybody. I'll send this to the executive committee. We'll all talk about it. We'll try to get the other side to the October meeting for everyone to be able to have that conversation. And then in November will be the final vote.
That timeline, I would say, does include the possibility of impacting how bond money would be used, given that it's likely it'll pass, or maybe it's not likely, I don't know. But so it does have relevance anywhere along the timeline. The faster, the better.
I see that Jean, your hand's raised.
Hi, yeah, I was just going to say that if we are going to try to do this with some, thought of making it more public, commensurate with the bond issue, then I like the idea that somebody had said before about posing some questions and also putting a deadline. Because we're looking to take some kind of position when you do the outreach and invitation to for the INC delegate meeting. I'm just thinking that because I could see that it might be just kind of ignored.
Anyone else? Like I said, I can't see the list. Okay, would you all be okay if I unshared my screen so that we can do hand raising to vote? Or do you want to be able to see it while you're voting? Okay, I'm gonna exit then.
Okay, so how do I raise my hand? I don't see a hand thing. Where's the hand?
Let's see.
You'll find it under reactions at the bottom of your screen.
Reactions. Boy, you are so smart. Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Gertie, I'm gonna lower your hand until I read saying that we
Okay.
support the resolution, okay?
Yep.
Can you put your thumb down to AE?
Yep.
Adrian, you have a question now or are you just voting?
No,
early?
no, I'm just trying to vote.
All right, so we're having a vote to advance this resolution to the executive committee, to INC in October. We're gonna try to get questions answered before October. We're gonna try to get them there in October, and it puts us on that track. All those in favor, raise your hand.
I can't vote since I don't represent my neighborhood.
That's okay.
So
Anybody
you
can
can
vote.
in
in the committee.
Yeah, you can vote in the committee.
Can
Come
I?
on, come on,
Yeah,
Alan.
yeah.
Get it together, man.
Yeah, everybody can vote in committee, and then it's only delegates that delegates can vote. So Alan, is that counting you as a yes?
There you go.
Okay, I'm gonna count these now on my screen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 11, 12 yes. And if everyone can put your hands down, we'll go to no's. All right, I'm lowering everyone's hand if you haven't yet. Okay, so if you're against it, raise your hand. Mary Jane, okay. 1 no. Okay, you can put your hand down.
You're muted, Mary Jane.
Okay, I was not against it. I couldn't put my hand down.
Oh, okay. Okay. So then we have 0 no's. Any abstentions? I'll put your hand down for you.
Why is this not working?
I put it down for you.
Okay,
So
thanks.
0 abstentions. Okay. So this resolution passed. And I'll make sure that this gets emailed today to the executive board right after this meeting. And if you do have questions, I guess we'll send an email around asking if anyone has.
Control it.
Hi, Gertie, I see your hands raised.
Yes, Ian, when I tried to check into this, it said it was the August meeting, and I tried 4 times, and it kept connecting me to the August meeting.
So did I.
I had the same problem.
I think whoever is, and I realize this is an administrative technicality, but it is very confusing for those of us who aren't as swift at this as some others. But thank you very much for organizing this.
Sure. Happy to talk about how we can improve our technology or make, what I realized is this one didn't have a hyperlink in it. So you had to copy it. I was told that. So, okay. Well, I think our October meeting, as you know, we're going to have the full presentation with the full draft zoning changes for the affordable housing. I'm not sure if anyone else has any other ideas. Maybe we'll of course have an update on this, I think is very important. And thank you all for being here on a Saturday morning, and I will see you soon and make sure this gets done.
Thank you. Bye
Thanks
all.
for organizing it, Ian.
Thank you.
Go Broncos.
Thanks, Ian.